In our coverage of this remarkable election cycle that we find ourselves now in the final days of, ahead of the May 19th primary, continues. Our series of extended interviews with major candidates in major races carries on. Right now, we're going to bring in State Senator Josh McLaurin. He's a Democrat. He is running for lieutenant governor in a competitive Democratic lieutenant governor primary. Senator, thanks for being here. We appreciate it.
Great to be here, Zach, as always. Thank you.
So let's talk about the campaign stuff and your positions. Of course, it's important. We want to get there in a moment.
Sure.
But we do have some brand new news just coming in moments ago. I suspect you just got it potentially not too long ago as well. Governor
Correct.
Brian Kemp has called lawmakers back for a special session in mid-June to address two big, thorny topics before the legislature. What are you going to do about potentially redrawing Georgia's legislative boundaries in the wake of Calais? And how are you going to resolve this question mark about what to do about our elections after July 1st? Let's start with this. When you get the call back, what's your first thought?
Well, I'm very disappointed. Governor Kemp had an opportunity, especially since he's not running for anything, he's not up for re-election, to do the even-handed thing, the steady-handed thing, and to resist the urge to jump immediately to partisanship and taking away black voting power. And I can talk about what that means in just a second. But, there's two issues you mentioned. One of them is a lot easier to address. There's a bipartisan consensus. There was a House bill, as you know, that the House had passed. The Senate didn't take it up that would have fixed the QR code issue to make...
A bipartisan over in the House, but not a bicameral resolution either. The state Senate opposed that House measure to move that QR code moving past deadline into the future.
But Senate Democrats would have supported that. So the thing I want the public to know is, of the two issues we'll take up, fixing the QR codes is probably the easier lift. There's a lot of bipartisan consensus for how to do that, even if Senate Republicans, as you suggested, were a little bit obstinate about that bipartisan solution. The much more difficult and thorny issue is going to be redrawing our maps. Let's not mince words. The Calais decision debilitated the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And the activists, the movement leaders, black Americans who bled and died for the right to vote, for fairness and equality under the law, that movement is now under attack decades later. The stakes are really that serious. And the section of the Voting Rights Act that was debilitated in particular is Section 2, which was a protection of black voting power and any minority voting power. Basically, whenever there's a community of minority voters that is large enough that if you put a district around them, they'd be able to elect their preferred candidate, that's a protection that existed under federal law for half a century. And what the Supreme Court has done is say, well, we don't have a protection anymore for those minority voting populations, that if Republicans in the majority want to, they can redraw maps in such a way to eliminate those black voters' ability to choose their own candidate. And that has real consequences with faces and names. My minority leader, Harold Jones in the Senate, he occupies a district in Augusta that represents just such a district. It is entirely possible that Senate Republicans will draw a map to eliminate Leader Jones's seat entirely and carve up the minority voters inside Augusta in that district and put them into different Republican districts where their vote will essentially be diluted. I can't stress enough. I mean, this is bigger than Republicans and Democrats. This is not your normal partisan fighting. We're talking about a generational civil rights moment where there has been, the floodgates have opened to allow for the same racism and forces that existed in the 1960s to operate to eliminate black voting power now. So I don't mean to be alarmist. I know people are tired of people turning up the temperature in politics and politicians acting like the sky is falling, but truly this is a generational moment, and Democrats need to be prepared to fight as hard as we can to protect black voting rights and to ensure that the civil rights struggle that we fought half a century ago does not go by the wayside.
That is a position that you have laid out here, and certainly a number of other Democrats, both here at the state level and at the national level, have forcefully made as well. There are others who have a different perspective on this. Some Republicans have come out and made arguments effectively saying that we are a different country than we were in the 1960s, that it is time, they would argue, for what they might describe as race-neutral districting laws. You, in your comment there, you pointed to the same racism coming back that we saw in the 1960s. I think there are a lot of Republicans who would push back on that and say these are two very different eras. What's your response to that?
I think that voters know a problem when they see it. And if you look at Representative Pearson in Tennessee, those powerful images coming out of Tennessee of a young black man who was running for Congress in Memphis, Tennessee, and you watch what the Tennessee majority did to carve up Memphis and throw it into a number of different districts where that vote will be diluted. Just the raw image of Mr. Pearson standing up against a state trooper who is not letting him in the room. And to be clear, that state trooper was not letting him in a room where his future would be decided, where his voters' future will be decided. He couldn't even be in the room. I think we visually, in our gut, we just remember those images from the 1950s and 60s, and we see some version of that playing out again. And if you talk to black voters, I mean, we're a couple white guys sitting here talking on the news. You have to talk to black voters about what they're going through right now. I talked to a black woman last night in Columbus at a house event that I went to, and she's scared and she feels overwhelmed. And she was asking me, what can I do to reclaim my power in this moment? And we're talking about organizing, and there's only so much I can really tell her as person from my background. But this is a really scary moment, and I don't think you can overstate how much black voters are concerned about this country moving backwards. And it's in context, too. Look at the way that Trump has used race baiting and fear of immigrants to try to shape politics in this country. He and his vice president repeated a shameful lie in Springfield, Ohio, if you remember. J.D. Vance's own constituents, they alleged that immigrants were eating cats and dogs, a completely made-up racist lie which justified the $70 billion expansion of ICE that we've seen since they took office. So it's not like this redistricting conversation is happening in a vacuum. It's happening against the backdrop of a cultural backslide where the Republican majority in D.C. and in Georgia are comfortable moving the needle backwards on some rights that we've fought so hard to protect.
So when this special session does get gavelled back in, you're obviously a strong opponent of redrawing Georgia's district boundaries. What are you going to do to stop it? What power do you have to stop it?
We got to believe in people power. I mean, look, Democrats don't have the votes to stop new maps, right? I mean, we know based on the gerrymandering that's already happened that the Republican majority, if they want to ram something through over popular objection, they'll be able to do that just by the numbers. But time after time, we have stopped bad legislation at the Capitol, not with our numbers, but with our voices. We have appealed to the public, and the public has showed up to say, this is a bridge too far. We don't want this to happen. I mean, look at the polling, for Trump with gas prices the way it is. You've got plenty of Mitt Romney voters and, fiscal responsibility Republicans who are looking at what's happening in the world and saying, I don't want to be part of this. And they are considering voting for Democrats this year. I think that, Brian Kemp is making a tactical mistake by redrawing these maps before the midterm elections. He is going to supercharge Democratic turnout. So that's going to, I think, moderate, hopefully, how far they're willing to go, because they know there's going to be an immense public backlash if they actually remove a lot of black legislators from office.
And in full fairness here to the governor, in your characterization, you said he's moving to redraw the district maps before the midterm. The governor has come out and publicly said that he doesn't want the new maps to go into play before the 2028 cycle, pushing back on some calls, including from within his own party, the Republican Party. At least one prominent candidate in a statewide race wrote an op-ed in the AJC
right,
calling for effectively the cessation of the early voting window, the ongoing congressional races, to redraw the maps for this cycle. The governor publicly is not going for that. Do you give him credit for that?
Well, I think that Brian Kemp has proven over 8 years that he's at least decent at politics. He knows that if he puts up a headline that says, I don't want to redraw the 2026 maps, a lot of people will not read any further and say, phew, I'm so glad he doesn't want to do what Tennessee and other states are doing. But let's be very clear. He is redrawing the maps, and today's news proves he is going to redraw the maps under the decision in Calais to reduce black voting power. And he is doing it not for 2026, the elections this year, but for the 2028 elections. So maybe there's a 2-year hiatus between when it takes effect and now, but that doesn't mean he's not doing it. When I say he's making a tactical mistake, I think that Kemp is making a huge mistake in underestimating the backlash from voters by taking this action before the midterm. So even though the maps would not take effect till 2028, by showing his hand, by showing what Republicans really want to do with representation, with maps this year, he's going to ignite a flame underneath the electorate. And I have to think the reason he's calling it this year is because he knows, look at the Cook Political Report rating on the governor's race and races in Georgia. It's either toss-up or lean blue. Brian Kemp knows there's a good chance that there would be a Democratic governor next year, and that's another reason to get out and vote, is that a Democratic governor can veto bad maps. And so he knows a Democratic governor is likely to veto any maps that the Republican legislature tries to draw. So I think that's why he feels like he's forced to rush it through this year.
We could talk, and not just with you, but any number of state lawmakers, just about this special session alone and fill up a full 20, 30, 40-minute interview.
That's right.
There is, as we talk about campaigns and elections, we've got an election coming up in just a couple days. Tuesday, May 19th, is primary election day. The early voting window has been running on for some time now. Let's talk about this. You're a state senator.
Yes.
You're running for lieutenant governor. The lieutenant governor leads the state senate. For folks who maybe are just getting to know you right now through this interview, or
Sure.
folks who have seen you in the state senate on the floor, you are a vocal Democrat. You're a vocal and frequent opponent of a lot of what the state senate Republicans tend to be moving on the floor. If you're elected to lieutenant governor, you would be an outspoken Democrat trying to lead a floor that likely is still controlled by Senate Republicans. How would you make that relationship work and still produce the lawmaking effort needed to keep the gears of government turning in the state Senate?
Well, thank you, Zach. And I do appreciate the opportunity to introduce myself to anybody who's tuning into this race. I want to be clear at the top. I am the consensus choice for this race. I've got 60 state legislative endorsements from my colleagues who I've worked with who trust me to lead. I've got the endorsement of groups like the AFL-CIO, Organized Labor, Georgia Equality, Georgia Association of Educators, which represents public school employees, the Young Democrats of Georgia, the Georgia Association of Black Women Attorneys. I've been campaigning for a year to build this statewide consensus. So just on that alone, the endorsements, I want people to know I'm a proven fighter who has the trust of my colleagues in this race. But I want to talk about things I've done across the aisle. I have passed the first ever statewide regulations on the predatory car booting industry. You ever had your car booted? You know that those guys will throw a boot on. They don't care if you follow the rules or not. They just want their $75. It's very exploitative. And I passed the first ever state law in history to regulate booting statewide and prevent corrupt practices like kickbacks, which booting companies were paying money to the property owners just so they could boot cars. It's really corrupt. But I also got $1 million in the budget for veterans with post-traumatic stress to do research into breakthrough therapies. First time we've ever researched those therapies using state dollars. Both of those initiatives required Republican cooperation, and I was proud to work with House Republicans and Senate Republicans and the Lieutenant Governor's office to get those things done. So I have the history of working across the aisle and getting things done. But then the question is, Democrats want to know, if you work with Republicans, are you co-opted by them? Are you going to fail to hold them accountable if you're too close to them? And the answer to that in my case is no. I have held Republicans accountable by being fierce, by getting up in their faces during floor debates and saying exactly what's on everybody's minds as they kiss up to Trump. I have used the phrase narcissist daddy on the floor of the Senate to refer to Donald Trump and the way that Republicans continually suck up to him by passing these bills designed to corroborate his election denial conspiracies, et cetera. And the way that you do it is with kindness, but conviction. You don't treat your opponent like they're the demons or, some kind of evil, scary demons, right? You have to work with them. You have to be kind, but you have to be crisp and honest. You have to be fierce. And what I've found is that when you do that, Republicans respect you. They want to work with you because they see you as a very strong character, a strong personality who is principled in your actions and your words. And what I've heard, there are 4 Senate Republicans who came up to me privately behind the scenes after some of the floor speeches that I gave about Trump. And they said, Josh, we're actually glad that you're doing this. Because I swear to you, Zach, 4 Senate Republicans privately, and I can't say who they are because I respect their confidentiality, but they said, we can't say the things that you're saying about Donald Trump because we would lose our primaries. So we're really glad that somebody is doing it because it is a scary time. So that gives you an idea of the role that Democrats need to play right now in history. We need to be speaking truth to power.
Let's tease this out a little bit, though, because I suspect some people watching will be nodding their heads along and thinking that they agree with what you just laid out. I am sure, and I suspect you would acknowledge as well, there are others who would hear you bragging about on the floor, calling President Donald Trump narcissist daddy, and then hear you say, hey, I'm trying to do this with kindness and conviction, and say those two things just do not equate. How do you walk that line, and how do you make the case to somebody who hears you use that language and say, that's out of bounds already?
Because it's honest. And the reason we have a failure of accountability in this country is because people have equated honesty to being mean. Well, don't tell me that that I lost the 2020 election, because that would be mean. Guess what, Trump? It was true. It was true that you lost the 2020 election, and we've been wasting 6 years of taxpayer money and time litigating dozens of cases to try to prove otherwise, and continually passing these bills on the floor of the Senate to make it look like Donald Trump was right. At some point, honesty hurts. And that's the thing that we need to clear up, is that it's not unkind to be honest about what's happening. It's the truth, and it's required for us to have the country that we have and for our institutions to stay protected. But just because I can point at Trump and say, look, that guy is likely a narcissist. I'm not a psychiatrist, but plenty have weighed in and think that all his behaviors exhibit that kind of selfishness. But what I can do is look to my Senate colleagues who I see every day, who I work with, who I value and respect as human beings, and I can say, look, let's work together on the things we can, but when you guys start to cater to this man's ego and we see all the consequences out in the world, Iran war, $5 gas, whatever, it's time to be honest about how bad this guy has been for our country.
This sounds a lot like a message that would be better received by a Democratic primary electorate than perhaps a general election electorate, where you've also got to pull in some traditional Republican voters, you've got to pull in swing voters, independents. Do you worry at all that your tack in the state legislature could help you in the primary but possibly hurt you in a general?
Not even a little bit, Zach, and I'll tell you why. Because I have found in talking not just to Democrats but to Republicans too, what they're tired of is that politicians lack a spine. I have a Republican state rep colleague, again, who I won't name. These guys will come tell me in private how they're going to vote. But he said there's a particular candidate on the other side of the aisle that he wants to vote for in my race. But if he doesn't get through the primary, he's going to vote for me instead. And this goes for a lot of Republicans watching at home. They are fiscally conservative. They want responsible government. They want a steady hand. They don't want government to get out of control, but they're also really tired of MAGA, and they're tired of Donald Trump, and they want a steady-handed, reasonable voice, who, whether it's Democratic or Republican, who can counter it. So my fierceness against Trump is something that a lot of Republicans invite. And I'll tell you one more anecdote. I heard through the grapevine that a Republican who voted against me in 2018 came around in my district a couple of years later and voted for me. And what he told a friend of mine was, say what you want about that McLaurin guy, but he says what he thinks. And I think that's what our country desperately needs right now.
Let's do this. Let's talk about some germane issues outside of the campaigning of the rhetoric, the sort of the politics of governing. Let's talk about some brass tacks.
Sure.
Affordability is front of mind for lots of voters. We've got 5 or 6 minutes left in this conversation.
Great.
We'd be remiss if we didn't talk about it. Things are expensive right now. A lot of voters want to know a clean answer to this question, so I'm going to put it to you. If you're elected lieutenant governor, what are you going to do to make living in Georgia more affordable?
Let's be super specific, right? Because Republicans have said, oh, let's cut the income tax, let's cut property taxes. But as we saw from legislative session, the full-blown version of those plans doesn't really work. You can't blow half the budget, a hole of, tens of billions of dollars just to give all the income tax money away. And you can't defund local governments by taking away all property taxes. It's just not workable. So Democrats have much more specific plans on the cost drivers that are making life less affordable. Let's start with healthcare. If we expanded Medicaid in this state, which we haven't done, we've refused to do it for 15 years, and we're only one of a handful of states that hasn't done it, we would download immediately $1.6 billion in bonuses that Ossoff and Warnock got us, but we get a 90% match from the federal government to ensure over 500,000 people in the state of Georgia who can't otherwise afford health insurance. That would bring all of our costs down, and it would stabilize rural hospitals. We could also, for $700 million a year, and we could do that by taxing insurance company profits, by the way, to raise that money. That's pretty popular. We could pay for the lost premium subsidies when D.C. Republicans failed to extend those subsidies late last year in 2025. We could replace that program at the state level up to 400% of the poverty line. Let's talk about housing. Corporate ownership of housing is a bipartisan issue. We don't like it. The hedge funds and big corporations that are buying up all the single-family housing stock, it's driving up costs for everybody, and it's making us a generation of renters who can't afford to buy our own home. Now, renting is fine, but we need to have options. We need people to build equity and be able to own their own homes. Right now, the first-time average home buyer age is at 40 years old. That's insane. It used to be in the 20s a couple decades ago. So let's work on corporate ownership. Let's also work on zoning reform. If we had smaller lot sizes and square footage allowed in communities across the state, that would bring down prices too by allowing us to build more units. We have a supply issue. We need to bring down the price by doing that. We could also fund our housing trust fund by using our budget surplus or other revenue sources to make sure that we're subsidizing affordable housing for people who need it. Those are specific ideas. And what I love about campaigning with Democrats this year on the primary campaign trail is I've heard other candidates say very similar things. We have a slate of policies on housing, healthcare, we want to fund childcare that are attacking each of the issues specifically and directly. When people say, what are you going to do for me? You make all these promises, but what specifically are you going to do? We are showing up with the ideas this year, and I think that's yet another reason why Democrats will be able to compete in November.
And quickly, a follow-up to that. That's a lot of ideas on a lot of topics: healthcare,
Housing,
education, a number of topics. If there is a knock that is sometimes floated by Democrats towards other Democrats in political circles, columnist Ezra Klein has floated this argument in recent weeks and months, is that Democrats are never short on ideas, but sometimes are a little short on turning those ideas into policy that gets out the door quickly in a way that constituents see the impact quickly. If you're elected, how do you turn these ideas into things that voters and Georgians feel immediately?
Well, new construction can happen in a few months, a year, a couple of years, right? If we had even the zoning reform on housing and some housing trust fund money, or a ban on corporate ownership and a phased, release of the stock that exists, I think that we could see results within 12 to 24 months on a lot of these policies. Medicaid is overnight. Let's contrast that with Brian Kemp's Pathways program, which insured only a few thousand people, cost millions and millions of dollars to Deloitte consultants, but it was a 2-to-1 ratio on consultant spend to actual healthcare spend. Contrast that with Medicaid expansion, which would be hundreds of thousands of people with full benefits overnight. We saw this in North Carolina. It made a world of difference when they expanded Medicaid. So some of these proposals do have immediate effect. Now, obviously, some of this is slow. Like if you want good public transit in Georgia, you may have to wait, 10, 20, 30 years for us to make the requisite investments. But I think it's all about balance. You want to have your long-term ideas that take a minute to invest in, and you want to have what you just mentioned, your short-term relief so that people can see change quickly.
We've covered a lot of ground here. I think this is a good place to land this conversation. It is a question we always ask candidates in this kind of interview, particularly with just days to go before a Tuesday primary election, to a voter who is still undecided in this race. Your closing pitch to that undecided voter would be what?
Let me go back to the endorsements. A lot of times, people don't visit the state capitol as often as we could. State government is a little less in the news than the federal government is. And so people show up to the ballot box and say, man, I don't know these people. I don't know who I'm voting for all these state level positions. And we got 80% undecided in the lieutenant governor primary. So what I would say is go with who Democrats trust. Look at who the Democrats and the progressives who are working at the state capitol every day, who do they trust? And that's why I'm so proud to have 60, that's dozens of state legislative Democrats from all different backgrounds and ages who have endorsed my campaign because they know they can work with me and that I can get the job done. I've got the groups like Organized Labor, in a year where we're talking about affordability, working people have endorsed my campaign, unions across the state, young people, young Democrats, Georgia Equality, because I stand up against attacks on vulnerable people and I'm vocal about it because I have a spine. Look at who the progressive groups trust. That is the kind of fighter that we want to send to be our lieutenant governor.
State Senator Josh McLaurin, a Democrat running for lieutenant governor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zach.